not this. Let's look at a situation in people's lives where we see the contrast of this word with inappropriate behavior. It helps us to understand the meaning of the word even closer. But here's what the Apostle Paul had to say in 2 Corinthians 10 and verse 1. Now I, Paul, myself am pleading with you by the meekness and gentleness of Christ. Notice we got both words here, meekness and gentleness. Some translations on other places might translate this as gentleness. Who in presence am lowly among you, but being absent am bold toward you. There can even be boldness with meekness. But again, we just don't think of things that way. I'm going to take us to the Greek translation of the Old Testament, which we know as the Septuagint version, of Numbers chapter 12 and verse 3. And I want us all to be reading that together this morning, because I'm hoping that we can put all this together before our time runs out. Again, we're going to be in Numbers 12, and the whole chapter, in fact. In the King James Version, as you come to verse 3, which will be the verse that contains this word, it says, "Now the man Moses was very humble." See, that's another rendering of the word. "More than all men who were on the face of the earth." And so I suggest that we read of a rather unfortunate situation that arose with Moses and examine, in contrast, the demeanor of his sister Miriam and brother Aaron on this situation. So let's read the first several verses. "Then Miriam and Aaron spoke against Moses because of the Ethiopian woman whom he had married, for he had married an Ethiopian woman." Your translation may say Cushite. "So they said, 'Has the Lord indeed spoken only through Moses? Has he not spoken through us also?' And the Lord heard it. Now the man Moses was very humble, more than all men who were on the face of the earth." Well, God's going to address their question directly. Now, the Bible tells us, and this is what's interesting about our reading, the Bible tells us that Miriam and Aaron spoke against Moses because he had married an Ethiopian, or that is a Cushite woman, verse 1. And then immediately, the next verse 2 states that they asked whether God spoke only through Moses, or has he also spoken to them also. I have a question for you. How is verse 2 related to verse 1? Who's able to put this together for us? Look at it once again. "Then Miriam and Aaron spoke against Moses because," here's the reason, "of the Ethiopian woman whom he had married, for he had married an Ethiopian woman. So they said, 'Has the Lord indeed spoken only through Moses?'" Who wants to put this together for us? Yes, Brother Bill.
My thought is he married a woman whom is outside the Hebrew religion. Okay, and Miriam and Aaron thought that he should marry a Jewish woman.
So you see that being the group.
And because he married outside of his religion, he thought that God was going to condemn him, not necessarily condemn, but ostracize him and punish him. And they thought that God should still speak
Okay? That's one thought. I can understand where you come up with that. Any other thoughts? What's the connection? It's a trick question. There is no connection. There is no connection. Then verse 3 turns our attention to the fact that Moses was very humble. In fact, he was humble more than all who were on the face of the earth. When you read this in context, what do you see is not the issue really? What is really not the issue?
I think it's the Ethiopian.
That's right. The fact that he married an Ethiopian woman is not the issue at all. There is no connection whatsoever with what they have to say.
Because he was a meek man, a humble man, Marion and Carlea thought that he should be bolder in talking to the Lord. But because he was humble, the Lord may not have listened to him.
So what is the complaint in verse 3 or verse 2? So they said, has the Lord indeed spoken only through Moses? Has he not spoken through us also? What's the issue here?
Authority.
Go ahead. Yeah. I think we'd identify that, Joe, as jealousy. They're jealous. And notice that they used his marriage to express pent-up feelings against Moses. This is really what's going on. It could have been anything. When people are in this type of mindset, and this happens in marriages, when one spouse is turned against another, guess what? There's not a thing that the other spouse does that's going to be acceptable. Everything that is said, everything that is done is looked upon with a critical eye. And here, Moses, God's leader, is being attacked by whom?
By his brothers and sisters.
These are family, yes, Steve, these are family members, aren't they? His own family. You see, this was a ruse, a crafty pretense of what was really eating at them inside. And they used Moses as marriage as an occasion to express perhaps long-seated resentment against him. This was pent-up ill will toward Moses. Their issue was that of jealousy. How does Moses respond? How does he respond? He doesn't respond, does he? There's no rebuttal. There's no explanation. Moses says nothing. I mean, when you're attacked like that, what is the hardest thing for you to do? Bite your tongue, that's right. That's why this is a sign of strength, not of weakness. He is a humble man. And I got to looking at that and thought, oh my goodness. This is a leader of God's people that is being attacked. And he's not really trying to defend himself. You see, often real complaints are disguised by superficial issues. When someone gets his feelings hurt and behaves inappropriately, he searches for valid reasons for doing so. And that person will go around trying to convince other people that this is valid. Come on, get with me on this. You know, this is the way we should respond. This is what we should do to this leader, to this person. And the people are receiving this message and, well, I don't know. See, they're having trouble putting it together until they realize that the issue is not the issue at all. It's what's lying behind it. And that's resentment towards the person. Yes, Steve?
I do have a sneaking suspicion that the reason they even brought it up in the first place is God's prohibition to marry outside of the Israelite community.
Well, how do you know that she was outside the Israelite community? Because she was a black woman?
So that would probably
Couldn't she have been in that? I mean, if this was against the law of God, don't you think God would have brought that up? Yeah. Especially with his leader Moses. See, we're still looking for justification for behavior like this. And there is no justification. They were waiting for a situation by which they could accuse their brother. And this is a good one. And God wasn't buying it. Yes, Brother Miller?
Most Ethiopians were considered to be black. So he married outside his race, and he married a black woman. And this upset Miriam and Aaron. But
Where did this woman come from?
Ethiopia.
Do you think she was living in? How did Moses get her?
I'm sure she,
Or was she with the people?
she might have been with the people. I don't know.
But whatever it was, we're still thinking about, well, this was against the law. If it was against the law,
Lord, what is
then we have some problem in understanding the law, don't we? If that's what we're saying. Because this met with God's approval. You see, this type of behavior often happens in the church when people's feelings are hurt and objections are voiced that give the appearance that they are for doctrinal reasons, when in actuality they are not. Most church splits, most church problems center around personalities. And incidentally, one of the 12 times this word appears in the New Testament is in Titus chapter 3 and verse 2, where Paul gives instructions to the young preacher Titus. Let's take a look at, keep your finger here on Numbers 12 because we're going to be coming back to it. But look at Titus 3 verses 1 and 2. Titus 3 verses 1 and 2. Starts out kind of interesting. Beginning of the 3rd chapter. Remind them to be of no one, to be peaceable, gentle, showing all, here's our word, humility to all men. Now, here's my question for you. Who are them in the second word? Remind them. Who are them? Who is Titus to remind?
Congregation.
The Cretans.
Cretans?
Particularly the church.
Okay, these are going to be church members. Go back and outline chapter 1 and chapter 2. First of all, chapter 2 and verse 2, they are the older men. Verse 3, they are the older women. They are the young women to their husbands and children, verses 4 and 5. That them are the bondservants or slaves, verses 9 through 14. And then Paul instructs Titus in chapter 2 and verse 15. Speak these things, exhort and rebuke with all authority. Let no one despise you. Verse 1, chapter 3. Remind them to be subject to rulers. So all this instruction is to members of the church on the island of Crete. An island that has a population known for as being what, Steve? Lazy, gluttons, liars. You see, what we're seeing here are people who actually behave the way that Miriam and Aaron behave. And you're seeing this is how society around you behaves. This is how people advance themselves in work. But that's not the moral compass you're using. You don't do that. Yes.
That's a real challenge I have at work. My boss is a wonderful person, don't get me wrong. But often he calls me out on when I go above and beyond doing these other things that I'm not getting kudos for.
Mm-hmm.
The things that no one else knows I might be doing because work's got to get done and it's for the benefit of the company,
Mm-hmm.
and then it just gets done. And he always calls me out and he's like, but no one knows you're doing it, you're not getting kudos for it. I'm like, but if someone's asking for help, I can't.
Yeah.
I can't not help them. So it's a real struggle, the world versus.
And then sometimes you actually have people to advance themselves will put you down.
Glenn,
Yes.
in your work, you do the things of integrity that you are to do, no matter what anyone else says. If somebody else is lazy, and like that, if one of my coworkers is lazy, and like when I worked at Sears and searching for bombs, one guy would just walk around the building, walk back in. But I took it seriously enough to look at everything. That's on me. Okay, that's not on him, because I'm doing the job right.
Well, you know, our behaving correctly in these situations is dependent upon what?
You said it more as a
Our operating properly, as what we're seeing here with Moses, is dependent upon what?
Obedience to the Lord.
the Holy Spirit dwelling within us.
Yeah, well, it's our faith that we put our trust in God. Remember, Moses says nothing.
That's right.
He has no comeback. He doesn't have a rebuttal to the charges that they are making against him. Well, God's only speaking to you. He's not speaking to us. But to whom, going back to our reading here in Titus, to whom in the church at Crete did Paul give the responsibility to govern against the kind of behavior that was exhibited by Miriam and Aaron?
Isn't it the elders?
It's to the elders. It's to the bishops. And they are to put an end to such. Now go back to the previous chapter of Titus chapter 1. And you see how all this ties up. Paul prepares Titus for what he's about to say. And then he says it. And beginning with verse 9, we read of those qualities that an elder must possess. It says, holding fast the faithful word as he has been taught, holding fast, you act in obedience to it, that he may be able by sound doctrine both to exhort and convict those who contradict. For there are many, here, look at these words. There are many insubordinate, both idle talkers and deceivers, especially those of the circumcision. My goodness, who comes to mind right now? Miriam, yes, Miriam and Aaron. And what? Whose mouths must be stopped, who subvert whole households. And in other words, they do this to their own families, teaching things they ought not for the sake of dishonest gain. This does really describe the attitude and conduct. Here's a question here as we go back to Numbers chapter 12. Moses does not defend himself. Does he need defending? Well, let's read on. Let's read on with verse 4. It says, "Suddenly the Lord said to Moses, Aaron, and Miriam, 'Come out, you three, to the tabernacle of meeting.' So the three came out. There the Lord came down in a pillar of cloud and stood at the door of the tabernacle and called Aaron and Miriam. And they both went forward. Then he said, 'Hear now my words.'" Who's talking here? God's talking. Well, you want to hear from God, didn't you?
I'm telling you.
Here I am. And I'm talking to you. Better pay attention. Hear my words. If there is a prophet among you, I, the Lord, make myself known to him in a vision. I speak to him in a dream. Not so with my servant Moses. Is God defending Moses? Why is he defending Moses? Because Moses needs defending. He is faithful in all my house. I speak with him face to face, not in a dream, not in visions. I speak to him face to face, even plainly, and not in dark sayings. And he sees the form of the Lord. Why then were you not afraid to speak against my servant Moses? Oh my goodness. I don't know about you, but if I were Miriam and Aaron, my kneecaps would be clanging together, wouldn't you? When you get a message like that from God, God's not going to let this thing pass by. He's not ignoring it. You see, the behavior of Miriam and Aaron is also seen in families, especially with married couples. Husbands and wives show meekness and humility toward each other.
I only question, did Moses need defending, or did God need to call out using Moses as an example for all of us to see?
Well, I think he needed defending only from the standpoint that he's saying, I spoke to Moses. He's speaking by my authority. It's by my authority. Actually, and it's a good question, because the emphasis is not upon Moses about me, oh, poor me. He's the leader of God's people. His position needs to be protected.
Because I was also thinking about the protection of Moses' nature, of that humbleness, that God is also speaking out in kind about not lashing out at people of similar nature.
Well, that was Moses' strength, though. It wasn't his weakness. By the way, God spoke up for Moses. When elders are faced with that type of situation, who speaks for them? who protects them?
Well, I would say probably the pastor, and I would say probably fellow congregants.
Well, of course, elders are pastors. But I'm also the minister here, the preacher here.
God in His Word does. The minister.
But when things like this come up and people are not listening to God's word, it takes God to speak to them directly to correct a situation like this. Who defends?
The rest of the congregation.
Yeah, the rest of the congregation. That's why you have this instruction. You teach them, all of them, the proper way to behave. Because if they don't know the proper way to behave, it comes back on you elders. We're talking about self-preservation, really, here, right? That's why it's important for the congregation to be taught. And when you have church members who will not listen to the elders or complain about the elders insisting upon God's word, what are you to do with them?
You want to defend the elders.
You withdraw from them. You remove them from the congregation. By the way, we're going to see that's going to be the action here.
I promise this is the last thing I'll say. That was the very downfall, or the beginning of the downfall of the congregation. That very near my heart was when they started saying, "Don't bother asking the preacher. All he's going to ask is what does the Bible say."
Yeah,
And that was the beginning of the end.
that's the end right there. Now, here's another question for you. Why do you suppose that God called all three out from the regular population to the door of the tabernacle? And when he gets to the door of the tabernacle, what appears? The cloud, the pillar of cloud. What does the pillar of cloud represent? The presence of God. What does the tabernacle represent? Especially the Holy of Holies inside that tabernacle, which no woman could go in. That's right. That represents the presence of God too. So if you're complaining about receiving the Word of God directly, here it is. I'm giving it to you, and I'm giving you the assurance because you know my presence is here and that I'm speaking to you. Yeah.
What God is doing here is by bringing them out of the tabernacle. He doesn't want everybody in the tabernacle to know what's going on. He wants to do it more or less privately.
Well, most likely though, there was nobody inside the tabernacle.
Well,
And he pulled them away from the rest, from all the tribes. This is a private meeting.
yeah, yes.
So remember at the beginning of the chapter, he brought them out from among the tribes. Because God is dealing with these three directly here. Now, let's read a little bit more here. And I'm trying to get through with the time because I don't want to pick this up next week, because if I do, we've got to review all this, okay? So verse 9 says, so the anger of the Lord, this is something that's really irritating God, was aroused against them. Who are them? Miriam and Aaron. And when the cloud departed from above the tabernacle, suddenly Miriam became leprous, as white as snow. Then Aaron turned toward Miriam, and there she was a leper. So Aaron said to Moses, "Oh my Lord, please do not lay this sin on us, in which we have done foolishly, in which we have sinned. Please do not let her be as one dead, whose flesh is half consumed when it comes out of his mother's womb. So Moses cried out to the Lord, saying, please heal her, O God, I pray. Just think, first of all, think about Moses' attitude even right now.
He's forgiven.
Of course he is. He loves his sister.
That's right, he doesn't want to see anything happen to her.
He said, can you imagine what kind of leader he'd be if he said, oh, I finally took care of her.
He'd be a lousy leader.
But that's not the kind of character that Moses possesses. And then the Lord said to Moses, if her father had put spit in her face, would she not be ashamed 7 days? What is he talking about here?
Opinion on leprosy.
What does spit in the face represent?
An insult.
It's a public insult. If you want to read about it, you can read about it in Deuteronomy 25 concerning the Levirate marriage, the law, concerning the dead brother whose living brother was to raise children to him. And if that brother refuses to do that, what was one of the penalties? You spit in his face publicly, because he's not meeting with his responsibility to his brother's family. And so what God is saying here, if you do that for that situation, what has happened here is worse than that. You do that for 7 days. Let her be shut out of the camp at 7 days, and afterward she may be received again. So Miriam was shut out of the camp 7 days, and the people did not journey till Miriam was brought in again. And afterward the people moved from Hazareth and camped in the wilderness of Paran. When you look at this and you analyze it, you see how important this is. Leprosy represented both moral and spiritual uncleanness that called for separation. We're just going to make a brief reference to 2 Kings chapter 5 and verse 27. This has to do with Naaman, the captain, receiving healing of his leprosy. Remember what was Naaman told to do?
Go get 7 times in the river Jordan.
Yep, 7 times in the river of Jordan, and he would be clean. And so Naaman was so thankful that he offered to Elisha the prophet gifts. I understand it was a considerable amount of money. And Elisha refused it. But somebody else wanted it. Do you remember who that was? His servant Gehazi. And he was punished with leprosy. And here's what 2 Kings 5 and verse 27 says. Therefore, the leprosy of Naaman shall cling to you and to your descendants forever. And so he went out from the presence of the Lord as white as snow. Miriam's leprosy left her personally unclean. It disrupted her fellowship with the rest of Israel. And she was separated from the camp 7 days so that her evil influence was gone. That's what you do. Why do you separate lepers? Because they're unclean. Keep it from spreading to other people. You see, envy is very similar to jealousy. And in Galatians 5 and verse 20, 2 verses before this, you have the list of the works of the flesh. And concerning envy, Proverbs 14 verse 30 tells us, a sound heart is life to the body, but envy is rottenness to the bones. Jealousy had just been identified as a work of the flesh and will keep us out of the kingdom of heaven. Here's how Galatians 5:20, 2 verses before this, reads. Idolatry, sorcery, hatred, contentions, or you may have in the New American Standard, strife, jealousies. Note how they keep company with each other. Jealousies, outbursts of wrath, selfish ambitions, dissensions, heresies. First question can come up, why was it that Miriam was struck with leprosy and not Aaron too?
That's the question I'm always going to ask. But I have a hunch because Aaron is appointed high priest.
Yeah, but why is she the one that gets the leprosy?
She's the one that said that the Lord should speak through them and not through Moses.
Wait, go back and read the text. It says they both said that.
Yeah, but I think it was, I'm thinking that she probably is the one that started the whole.
Ah, that's what I'm looking for. She's the ringleader. She's the one that started this. Notice, her name comes first. Miriam and Aaron. She's the one that put this in the mind of Aaron, her brother. And what do we know about Aaron? He is weak, isn't he? Forget about his being the high priest, Steve. This is not going to help him a bit. He's weak. When's the first time we see his weakness?
Exodus 32.
Yeah, with the incident of the
Oh, yeah.
molten calf, right? He wouldn't receive responsibility. Well, it just came up out of the fire, that type. And he was left in charge when Moses went up on the mountain.
To get the Ten Commandments.
And he lacked the character to guide the people in Moses' absence. We don't have time right now, but I invite you to look at 1 Corinthians 3 and verse 3 and look at what kind of company this word keeps in 1 Corinthians 3 and verse 3. We're talking about the jealousy and so on. We're looking at the opposite. Here you have Moses, who is a humble man. He's not striking out and so on. And he's called a humble man or a meek man. And here he stands in contrast to his siblings. And so we learn more about the meaning of the word when we see what the word does not mean. Now, in Numbers 12, verses 15 through 16, it says, So Miriam was shut out of the camp 7 days, and the people did not journey till Miriam was brought in again. And afterward the people moved from Hazereth and camped in the wilderness of Paran. Let me ask you this. How serious was this situation? When you read the text, how serious was it?
She's trying to usurp Moses by trying to.
What you just read, how serious was it?
Very serious.
How do you know it was serious?
She was also.
God himself had that.
Okay, let's read the text again. You can't answer the question unless you read the Bible. Okay? It says, So Miriam was shut out of the camp 7 days, and the people did not journey till Miriam was brought in again, and afterward the people moved from Hazereth encamped in the wilderness of Paran. How serious was this? They stopped their progress, didn't they? Till it was resolved.
Exactly right. And she was ostracized.
What do we want to do?
Keep going.
We just ignore it. And we're not going to allow that to happen. But if this situation was not corrected,
They never
what kind of influence do you think Moses would have from that point on? Do we not see what the Bible is showing us here? And why shepherds, elders have the responsibility for members to behave appropriately, because if they don't, they're like the leprous person who is what? Ostracized. Because this is leaven, this is evil influence. Aaron had already been influenced by his sister. And she's speaking out, and he's brought into it. Other people are hearing it. And so what does God do? He pulls the three away from the population to the front of the tabernacle and deals with this directly. Most times we don't do that. And then we turn around and we start moaning and complaining and saying, I don't know, why isn't the church growing? Why do we have splits in the church? Because we're not dealing with things like this. We're letting people behave like Miriam and Aaron behaved. But elders, remember, are to be humble, which doesn't mean that they are weak. They are strong. But they're going to be able to do their job, and people understand that inappropriate behavior and comments are not going to be tolerated, then they need to see to it that the congregation is taught. In this situation, God had to do the speaking. But he's spoken to us in his word. He tells us what we need to do. Yes, Brother Miller?
But also with Moses being the shepherd, after he got out of Egypt, wouldn't that also make him humble by being a shepherd over?
Well, let's just say, he said, wouldn't that make him humble being a shepherd? Let's just say that God saw to it that Moses was prepared for the task.
Yeah.
Okay? Whatever was necessary, he did. Very good. Now, what we've focused on today is on the seriousness of the sin and how important it is to develop this word, prates, meekness or gentleness. And we saw that in contrast to this is really the word jealousy. Next week, I hope for us to finish our discussion on this word as we look at other passages that in the New Testament that helps us understand what this fruit of the Spirit means. I want to thank you for your kind attention. I would say we'd have a closing prayer, but seeing to it that nearly half of our people are not in class right now, because we'd have a prayer for our meal in just a few minutes. We'll just have to wait till we get downstairs to do that. But thank you so much for your kind attention, and we will pick up with our study next week. We're dismissed. What's that?
No, he's just like
Oh.
guy with a, like,
Yeah. The question doesn't seem to be whether it was lawful for him to have the woman. Evidently it was.